Awesome. Hello, everyone. Happy
So,
Tuesday.
what were you saying?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, cool. Hi, everyone. Happy Tuesday. It is great to have y'all here. While we give folks a minute or two to join, we're going to start with an icebreaker in the chat. So feel free to drop in the chat with a number on a scale of 1 to 10, your current understanding of artificial intelligence. 1 being, I didn't know what AI stood for until I joined this session today, and 10 being, I definitely like to join Austin the next time he presents on this topic because I hold a lot of expertise. So feel free to drop it in the chat. I'm definitely like a solid 4 on the scale for myself. I was telling Austin, took a couple classes in college on AI, so maybe I can scrape some of that knowledge back out of my brain. But yeah, excited to have y'all here today.
All right, should I get going or do we want to wait for the icebreaker to populate?
Yeah, I'll repost it in the chat as well. Cool. Love that folks are on the same level as me.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, the scale is from like my Uncle Ricky in Georgia, who's a landscaper, and Andrew Ng. So put yourself somewhere in there.
Love it.
I was about to make a joke in the chat, but I'll restrain myself. But anyways,
Awesome.
well, I appreciate everybody being here. I got a couple things wound up for you, but I really would like for this to be as interactive as possible. My monologue can get pretty boring after about 5 or 10 minutes. So I'd like to make sure this is tuned towards y'all, and I live in this world, so it's easy for me to baseball. But my goal here is to start with, what's the background for me and my organization, and why do I have any bearing on this? And then to some kind of general tenets that I have for communicating with folks, especially on emerging technologies. And then I'll move into kind of an instance of what we've worked on for kind of our project AI Across America, which is where the Building AI Across America name comes from, and how that tries to tie together the things I'm describing to you towards the end of a plan we identified for building up AI capacity and innovation ecosystems. So very quickly, like I said, Austin Carson, I'm the founder and president of Seed AI, and also work with a lot of other organizations on kind of the same front, especially around congressional education. And Seed AI is an organization I founded about a year ago. So we're right in that kind of still peak everything's crazy time, around the idea of working directly with communities to help architect a plan for them to build an AI or an innovation ecosystem that supports AI research, development, application, testing, education, and workforce development. So I know that sounds like a really big bite to take out of something. And I think the important thing to tag on there is, kind of the architecting and the ecosystem component, because there are a ton of really good people that are working on each of these individual components for their respective circumstances and their communities. And so to help bring those together and then show how they function in different environments and help provide kind of a blueprint or a plan for public officials, NGOs, private sector folks to participate in that is kind of lifts up that entire boat and gives you a way to help different people accomplish their objectives in kind of a super win-win scenario. Before that, I worked at Nvidia for 3.5 years, which, if you're not familiar, they make the computing platform that powers something. I mean, it was 92% last time I checked a year or two ago, but it powers somewhere between probably 80 and 90% of all artificial intelligence training. And then I, really worked closely with their technical staff and their kind of bigger picture business staff to stand up the government affairs department and think through, what's a primary added value for the organization as a kind of big ecosystem player in AI, and that is educating, right? Trying to give that experience a little bit more broadly. And then about, I would say, probably a year before I left, or maybe a year and a half, we started working on a project that really pushed aside a lot of the kind of misconceptions about the inevitability of AI development being or not being in certain environments, right? It was a big full spectrum investment in the computing and the data and the education, et cetera, in Florida, at the University of Florida, and then a lot of effort locally and with national, like NSF investments to help adjust the curriculum they created, move it to other parts of the university ecosystem, in particular for, folks at minority serving institutions, historically Black colleges and universities, community colleges, creative institutions. I mean, a pretty broad spectrum of folks who, again, as a general matter, there's a strong negativity approaching even nihilism of kind of having this broad inclusion and representation. And I loved it, obviously, since I jumped off of a gravy train and decided to start a nonprofit, which wouldn't advise it. And so, really trying to expand that out over time and think about how it's valuable and actionable for kind of the broad group of stakeholders I was engaging with on a daily basis. And kind of tying that together with my knowledge from, educating folks is how I got to kind of the place I am right now. And then before that, I worked at another nonprofit, was executive director for a bit, Tech Freedom. And then before that, I worked on the Hill for like 6.5 years. And my last boss was Congressman McCall, who is now the vice chair and soon to be chair of the Congressional Artificial Intelligence Caucus. So that's kind of my thread drawn all the way through this thing. Next, I'll get to some kind of general principles of how I thought about this and some quick advice. But before that, I will kind of expand on and give a reference point with 90 seconds of your life to watch a video. So apologize for making you do it, but I think it really ties stuff together in a cleaner way than I just did. And the methodology behind it is, again, tuned towards what I'm about to kind of go through here. So
AI isn't what you see in the movies. It's not
all right, here we go.
Magic or some alien force. Artificial intelligence is a reflection of people, created by people. It already powers the devices and services we use every day. And with the pace of research, we'll go from these small systems to complex technology that can change everything. But right now, we have a problem. AI is moving fast and becoming so costly that public investments and small players can't keep up. Because AI is a reflection of the people involved, we need to ensure the tech won't harm people that don't look, act, or sound like those who made it. The good news? There's an answer. By investing locally, we can grow a diverse generation of AI dreamers and creators from across the country. America is ready for action, and Seed AI is making it easier for everyone to work together. We're curating an expert network of thinkers and doers who will help refine our work and support new initiatives. We're creating policy perspectives, detailed, actionable guidance for decision makers around initiatives that contribute to AI access and more local capacity. Finally, we're helping to build the programs themselves, working with communities to bring everything together. Seed AI is building a more inclusive, representative future where we'll solve problems and improve life in ways we can't yet imagine. Learn more about how we'll start at seedai.org.
All right, well, hopefully that wasn't too onerous, but what I'll jump to in a second about some of the communication and packaging of this stuff. I'd like your feedback as we move on about, what you like about it, dislike, or have questions, and, how you take those thoughts in relationship to anything that I share or display from here on out. So going to, how do you engage with Congress? How do we get from kind of, me working for Congressman McCall, just kind of randomly thinking about these things and, how I had to balance equities all the way up that ladder, right? The first step of it is you have to establish both a baseline of knowledge in terms of where people are and where you have to get them to. And then you have to establish the incentives for that knowledge, right? And they range kind of the gamut. And for congressional staff, there certainly are, and for other government officials, and honestly, for executives at private companies, there are like kind of a clear incentive system in their mind that ties back to, you know, in a way that you may not necessarily comprehend, but each of them, especially at kind of this executive or operational, like high level or like decision-making operational level, has that heuristic device, right? And there's commonalities that run between them. And those are ultimately the best way for you to approach a complex topic, right? So again, start with their motivation. If you're talking about congressional staff, I would argue that in this, you know, or even I think folks, maybe a percentage of the folks in perhaps policy positions in executive and possibly even private, I haven't considered as much. But I think especially for congressional staff, you kind of cut into a couple different like operating frameworks depending upon for emerging technology work, kind of depending on where they sit and where their district is. And so the first is, you know, your true nerds, the people that like really love this stuff and really want to get into it. And any expert you bring around, they'll be excited about it as you are. And I mean, the only way to really work with that category in the first place is to also really feel that way, right? And be really excited about what you're going to present to them, or at least understand what people that feel like that want, you know, and how they internalize it. But ultimately, speaking with that group, it's important to keep in mind that they still don't actually probably have deep knowledge on the topic, right? Even if they love it, they've probably still been through like a couple hearing preps, some meetings, and then, you know, keeping up with it along with the other 12 things they're keeping up with, right? So it's still important to remember, and this is a mistake I made a lot before I remembered that this is all I think about, and nobody else, you know, especially the esoteric of it. And I'll get to that in a second, but it's important to remember that. And then for the second group, you've got folks that are, you know, interested, but not to the point where they'll devote that kind of fraction of their mind that congressional staff have for any focused work, you know, and they like to learn, but I think their like eyes are bigger than their stomach, if that makes sense. And also a life I've lived. And so, you know, there's an interest in, you know, enough like a functional knowledge of the technology, at least to kind of add to that heuristic device. And then there's an interest in how it's beneficial, right? How they can add it to something they're working on for, you know, their boss's ambitions, the district ambitions, kind of what their ambitions are for their career. And you can see how this would cut in different directions for the other groups. So I think it is especially strong given the divided attention and like strong motivators present in those legislative offices and some executive offices. And then the final group is like, whatever, you know, I think it's kind of like if you bring a compelling argument that has a clear benefit for, again, those three stated boss, office, self ambition, then I think that you can still kind of make that education. But it's important to know that if you kind of amp up the line and try to bring them your director of research to dig into some stuff, it's not necessary and possibly not even helpful. And I would wind back to say for all of these groups, the packaging is super important in addition to the understanding of incentives, right? You have to consider the time frame, the level of interest, and then again to the heuristic device. It's their district, their boss, themselves, and then for overall operation, you can add into it, you know, what does the committee want? What does leadership want, right? What are the other people in their state doing? What's happening in their state, right? And then again, what are they bringing home for any of those folks? So, you know, kind of moving a little bit beyond that, what are mechanisms for action, right? And in fact, I'll go to some kind of general principles, and then if anybody has questions, drop them in the chat and I'll try to answer those, but otherwise I'll happily move on. So, you know, the first thing I'll say is, on one hand, AI and, you know, with the deep learning kind of revolution, right? But modern AI, while it feels like it's been moving for a while, it's moving fast, it's still super nascent. And it's super nascent in the sense that, you know, we're on the like breakthrough point to some obscenely, absurdly advanced technology that we barely understand, to be honest, right? And that the policies that we've really gone through in the industry that we've addressed in the past is about to fundamentally change in some ways by the advent of, I mean, in particular, large transformer models and, you know, more advanced reinforcement learning. And we can, you know, have some resources drop for technology or for education if anybody wants to dig deeper. But we are like moving past this inflection point and we are at Genesis, you know. And to be honest, for that reason, I'm really thankful that you're trying to learn about this, or you're interested in learning about it, because it is very, very important. Critically, cannot overstate this. It's not just that I love my idea that I went and jumped off a cliff for starting Seed AI. It's because I am firmly convinced that it is critical that we Saturday morning cartoon work together and get this right and do our best. We literally need to. I'm not going to be so histrionic to say we'll survive as a species, but it will not be enjoyable if we screw this one up. And the second thing I'll say I'm finding is that because you're oftentimes stepping into a relative vacuum of knowledge, especially if you make a good faith effort to, really figure out what they want and work with folks and educate them, you can, to some extent, overcome partisanship. And you can either do that because you're in a total vacuum, right, where nobody's really talking about this yet, right? Like, again, conversations about recommender models on social media sites have been going on for a while, but at the same time, that's still technology that's like evolving super rapidly, right? And so the conversation about it and where you can stand on it changes. It doesn't have to be just about, oh, they're blocking me or somebody else on Twitter, right? But if you move a step beyond that and get into this frontier technology I was mentioning, there's so much stuff nobody is in any way discussing outside of just kind of scratching at the edges of it. There are so many things that can be identified for folks to work together on, or like to do like some type of oversight or even job owning on, right? If we're being honest, that I think that you can, to some extent, get around the bipartisan, kind of the horrible cynicism and partisan rancor. And then the kind of carry on thing to that is, because it is both nascent and because there are a ton of kind of opportunities to do what seems like smaller work, but is actually very significant work. If that makes sense. Little provisions of law, little additions to how things are tested or evaluated, or, the expansive or lack of expansiveness in programs, or, who is considered in things, what agencies are involved, who has headcount. I mean, just things that seem more trivial than normal can have a really big impact in a way that is, again, kind of just proportionate to the normal universe. And so those are kind of Kobayashi Maru ways you can get at what are bigger issues without lighting the political torch. And then I feel like I got a couple more things I want to say. Okay, so it is really, really important to never underestimate the power of a constituent connection. And I don't even mean that in the regular sense of like, yeah, you have to bring in their constituent at your trade association. But I mean, finding the people on the ground that are doing the exact or as close to the exact thing as what the member wants to do or would want to do, right? And like working out with them how it relates to the district and what the opportunities are, and then kind of getting them excited to work with you on the thing you want to work on. And again, that's not, it's a heavier lift. It's more groundwork. It's a pain, right? But I mean, we've found super interesting that I had no idea. Thank you, Catherine. That I had no idea existed as we've moved around the country in AI across America, which I'll return to in a moment. But super, super important. And so then let's go to kind of what are the action points that for an emerging technology conversation are particularly useful. I want to return back to the point about small things are much more meaningful than ever before. Finding out, searching those things out are kind of your ultimate lever. Like I would say in an ideal world, if you have the time and investment and a big enough nerd that loves this stuff, you can get ahead of lobbying, right? Like I feel like my lobbying percentage has never been above like, I don't know, some 3%. I have no idea, because the vast majority of the time, if you work out these concepts and figure out what needs to be done, it's like the process runs after that, and you don't have to go back and do too much. And again, a lot of that is functional based upon how much you do that legwork at the beginning to make sure that you're in kind of this agreeable space. And ideally, you're living in a win-win space where you're able to address like a number of different equities at the same time, and understand how to approach things, package them, and with intellectual honesty account for the different folks at play at the very beginning, so that things that, if reframed without kind of the incentive structure in place, would be politically unpalatable, right? Like if the conversation and the table setting of the thing was captured, it wouldn't really work out if somebody decided to blow it up. But if you can make it just its kind of useful win-win core, and I'll give an example of this in a second, but like useful win-win core, then you can move forward a little bit from there. And let's see, anything else? Oh, and then, so I would say two of the most useful things to do when you need to approach at either a more extended education phase or a higher level of education on a particular topic, and this is no surprise to any of you, I'm sure, but I would say it's disproportionately useful to invest in, and the investment in part is what I think gets lost a lot of times, but like invest in the coordination entity, right? So like be intentional about working with the AI caucus, or be intentional about working with the Congressional Tech Staff Association, right? Think about, and as much as you can, about how you can kind of add value in a way that does also address your concerns. Because the more that you add value, and this is a lot more than just having a meeting and being like, please use this as a resource, right? Which I just legitimately banned people at Nvidia from ever saying, because I'm like, dude, I heard that legitimately like 50 times a week. It is semantic satiation. It's like when you say the word over and over again, it loses all meaning after the 10th time, you know? And I think at this juncture, it is rote, and you do want to show a level of intentionality, especially when it's an issue that people are scared to talk about, right? Like they're embarrassed. I was embarrassed. I was the AI guy, and I was like, oh no, I don't know anything compared to these guys. I'm just going to try to seem smart for a second, you know, which puts you in a bad spot, right? So I think kind of demonstrating that, being proactive about it, is one of the best ways. And again, having stuff over time that, you know, shows people that you're bringing something that's new and has an actionable edge to it. And so I think those are kind of my, oh, and then the final point on that is to also focus on supporting kind of the other entities that do educational work, and figuring out how you, and not capture or like interject or anything, but legitimately, is there a specific value that we can come in and inject? Is there something that we can do to feed in that answers questions that they are posing, or kind of you know, it is a new development. It's very interesting. It's something that is impactful and folks should know about, right? I think there's one side of this game where people are just kind of going into third-party validators and just being like, hey, we think this is ideologically aligned with you. You want to check it out briefly and then just publish it, you know? And then I think there's the flip side where, again, to the you're not lobbying, where it's like you're helping to look at what things are being established and how you can make the foundation of it grokkable for folks, you know? And this is a thing I used to always try to explain whenever you're talking to lawyers internally. It's like the important thing here is not like you need to be accurate, right? But the important thing here is that it's grokkable and then accurate. You know, people have to be able to really grasp what it is that you're talking about and what it means for them quickly. Whereas if you roll down a big list of stuff off of a marketing document or a one-pager, everyone's going to zone out, you know, unless it's just a super valuable thing that's included in that one-pager or marketing document that they need. Like folks are like, all right, nice. Well, we did our favor for that guy. All right, nice. We did our favor for that guy. You know, and I think that's a place that folks kind of live. And so from there, if nobody has anything they want to pop into the chat, I will kind of move on to, you know, our exemplar of, you know, this for us and our try at the ultimate win-win. You know, it was my real shot into maybe we can make everybody happy, you know, and I'm not that naive, but we can make a lot of people happy, I think. So coming back to the original premise, you know, of Seed AI, yeah, Connor, I feel you. Coming back to the original premise of Seed AI and some of the things that I've discussed, you know, we had so many ultimately requests from congressional offices while I was still at Nvidia and trying to figure out like, how can I package this up for folks in a way that's really focused on burning resources on like them, even if it's not helpful to any individual entity, right? And and it really comes to the fact of resourcing, right? And the determination that to be intentional about things, to like demonstrate the value, you have to invest in it yourself. And as if you're as a larger corporation, if you have a nonprofit arm or something, that could be a great place to do that, to demonstrate the investment, try to be fair-minded about it. But if not, or if it's kind of a standalone thing, coming in as, hey, we've all been talking for a while about y'all wanting kind of like the outputs of this conversation of how can we make this work for your district, your constituents, what are the base components, how can we start stringing them together, what's the objective, and move towards, okay, I need staff to work this up, I need ways to package it, right? I need ways to make people understand why it would be immediately valuable to them, and for the folks that participate to be able to turn around and have something solid to stand on. And so we did effectively a kickoff event, set the table kind of with what are the main things we're talking about: National AI Research Resource, the NSF's new technology directorate, who are the folks involved. You got some government officials, some private sector folks, you've got the folks that have written some of these aspects of it, you've got different analysts across the line. We have some students, we have some startups, and we're again trying to cover the broad universe of people who are impacted as you would build out these kind of resources for folks to get involved. And so, in laying that groundwork and then stating at this event very clearly, like, there is an opportunity now that has not existed any time in the recent past, right? There is effort, and now a mostly or partially halfway successful effort, right, to massively invest in folks building, testing, prototyping, researching AI, and applying it to what their lives as they are already. And now we can really sprint at it, and there's a lot of effort for the inclusion and adaptation for people's different strengths and circumstances. And then from there, it's about practically stringing it together. The first thing, which is to the point about kind of packaging and finding the solution that works for folks around the board, but is also very necessary, is looking at this question of safety and testing and inclusion and diversity, representation, application level stuff, getting community colleges involved, right? As opposed to just R1s. Having the R1s have an opportunity, the top research institutions have an opportunity to work with the companies and community colleges, right? There are all these questions that are kind of living there. And there's one, kind of encapsulated answer, which is the idea of like a test bed and working environment. It's a place where some like high level sensitive research can happen, where you can take things like large language models, put them in context and research them, have the broad universe of people from like NGOs to safety standards folks to company people to different governmental bodies, kind of participating in this in some way. And then as a collateral benefit, the same infrastructure, the same compute, much of the same data, many of the same people that you would require to do that aspect of it are also incredibly valuable for application and commercialization and public-private partnerships, right? And so having it together like that keeps it from being something that's kind of charged in one direction or the other, and gives you both halves of that coin, right? And there's some conversation we've had about that as like, a working model, and you have a secondary component of, the National AI Research Resource, which is this big investment in shared compute and data. Instead of having to worry about fighting for X billions of dollars for, something as contentious as, and you can see some work we did on this on our website, but for something, potentially contentious like a, JEDI contract-ish thing, to, instead we can turn around and say, well, you'll need a central piece, but if we can build out all these kind of working environments and test beds through the other stuff coming through chips and science, they can form, the majority of that kind of compute, and what you need is the center, right? And so again, it's a way to take something that you still, and again, in my view, this is ideally how this should all pretty much take place, right? I'm not even being sly or anything. I'm just like, yeah, this is what I think should happen, and I think it's helpful, so maybe try it out. But you're able to remove that kind of top level barrier and tie it back to like, hey, we're going to be able to put one of these things in Alabama. We're going to put one of these things here, there, and it's the interconnection of them that makes it valuable, but it also needs to have some substantial tie to everybody, or it doesn't accomplish the purpose. I have some disagreements with people I like and respect, and that's okay. So take away from my can't please everybody thing, but the core objective, right? The core mission is still shared, and my differences are just based upon our work and our research. But those are differences because we kind of operate from that shared victory standpoint. It's a lot easier to discuss, right? And because we are a 501c3, and this is again my personal whatever, it's not you have to do this, it's just a slight change in strategy, but especially because we are a C3, it makes it a lot easier to be like, these opinions are based upon this stuff, and we're happy to change them if you guys have a difference of opinion that's reasonable to us, you know, and we're just trying to hone in on that, what works best for XYZ thing I've been through. And again, we find that to be not only effective from a advocacy or political maneuvering standpoint, but we also find it effective from just a goodwill perspective, right? And a willingness for folks to collaborate with us, and for ourselves to get smarter, to be honest. I mean, being able to have that posture itself is a, get another video up for y'all, I know you're gonna like it, but being able to just have that perspective means everywhere we go, we learn something that improves upon what we're doing. And again, it's not that everybody doesn't do that, but we have the luxury of not having 10Ks to have to file, you know, and shareholders to have to answer to, I mean, we have a board, but, you know, shareholders to have to answer to, you know, outside of being mission driven. And at the same time, right, the luxury that, like, taking that luxury for us doesn't mean that we aren't helpful to those other entities as well, because our mission and our goal is inherently designed to be public and private cooperative, right? I mean, one of our tenets is like everybody should get paid. And I mean, you know, that sprung out of, you know, the fact that certain programs were pretty much just farming out work and not paying people. But we think everybody should get paid. So it's like whoever wants to work and collaborate on this, in my view, it shouldn't be like a burden you have to carry. It should be an exciting opportunity, right? So I don't think any corporations are mad at me for being like, hey, if you come up with a good plan to sell $100 million worth of stuff, and it helps people out in a way that is like demonstrable, reasonable, and you're, you know, collaborative and not trying to have a kind of seized thing here, that's awesome. We'd love for that to happen. We'd love to talk about how great it is, you know? And so for us, it does ultimately come down to kind of the groundwork. I think that's what's valuable to pretty much the entire universe of stakeholders. It's having not just kind of the bank of people that are helpful, but also the context and the ability to, you know, cut through to what's interesting to folks in a way that honestly, outside of some kind of national trade associations, you know, I don't think you see. And even in those instances, we still get kind of a unique take on it because it is very community centric, right? Like, we're trying to see how the whole thing can benefit, and where you know, I mean, some of the issues are incredibly predictable and the solutions aren't easy. And, you know, there's mostly historical problems, but we try to see what we can do on everything from, you know, the super low hanging fruit. Wow. You know, Shell is doing a project to do like predictive maintenance, and these students at this community college are doing the same work. You guys should just pair together, and we should figure out how to get that pushed through. To the really, really big picture stuff, you know, it kind of opens that opportunity. So I'm going to briefly drop into a video to kind of demonstrate, you know, at least for us, what this looks like in practice. So this is our second AI across America event at Chicago, and you will see, all right, you know what, just because I love you guys, I'm gonna start with one, and then I'll take a vote for objection and then show you the other one. So here's from our kickoff at Stanford, right? And the following event was in Southside Chicago, right? So I think it's pretty clear the contrast that's involved there. But, you know, if you go to Stanford and try to see like what has been done to address the issues that we're pretty well aware of in tech, right? and what happened at the beginning. How did things get screwy, right? How did people fail? How did they succeed? And then it's kind of like, what's been the experience of people in Southside Chicago, and how can they, what's being done that's effective, what's good, and then like what are the presumptions of others who would be helpful that are incorrect, and how can we help rectify those, and how can we help team and pair people together and have some educational content to get it so that it is jointly functional. So we'll start with the Stanford side of things. Let me use video share again. Wrong tab. All right, so we'll start with Stanford, and then, like I said, if nobody objects, we'll move over to Chicago. But all right, here we go. I gotta move up here. Seed AI exists for the purpose of building AI ecosystems across the country in a community-driven way, focusing on underserved people and regions.
I think that America will be the true leader in AI. We're poised to do that. We have the capacity, we have the people that can lead and shape this effort.
So there are regions of California where we can beneficially put these engines that can drive innovation ecosystems in those regions that have not traditionally benefited from science and engineering research.
The sooner we provide concrete guardrails and guidance through Congress and through industry activism, the better off we're going to be in developing this amazing technology.
Austin, you're still on mute.
Okay. So anyways, I was going to say, any objections to another 90 seconds on Chicago as contrast, or any comments or thoughts on that, like how that's presented versus what I've been saying so far? I'll give you guys like a minute, since I think it takes 45 seconds for the questions to populate or something. I don't know. Lena, any thoughts, questions as we're waiting?
Yeah, one question that came to mind for me, hearing, especially you talk about in the video, touching on that, it's really a community-driven vision. I know that recently the White House released a blueprint for sort of this AI Bill of Rights. And so would love to hear you speak to what does that mean for AI policy? Is that changing the way you're engaging with the executive branch? Any tips you've got for folks engaging with the executive branch around these more complex issues? Would love to hear your thoughts there.
Yeah. Let me do something real quick. Because I closed a window. Okay, so I do have a couple thoughts on this, and I won't go on any further unless somebody raises it. I'll say, to the question of community, I mean, the one thing, and I wasn't doing anything on biometrics or didn't have, et cetera, so I wasn't personally miffed. But, I think for the, hey, thanks, Jessica. I think for the question of community, I got a general perception from a lot of people, especially folks in industry, I guess, who felt like the overall stakeholder requests and feedback maybe were not as much as they should have been, and that the document was far more substantial than anticipated, given the fact that it was, I think, overall biometrics roundtables. I would say, another thing is that from the overall, so we wrote a letter. Well, hold on. That's not what I said. We supported a letter, right? That, went out from the folks who had drafted the NARE and or the National AI Research Resource Task Force, which was passed into law last Congress. And, kind of moving forward to say, as the AI Bill of Rights, I think as some folks were saying that the AI Bill of Rights and the NARE were incompatible, that if we did a national AI research resource, it would, inherently be captured by a large company, or it would, focus on the wrong types of research. There was just a pretty significant blowback. And so, there was a question of there are a lot of things that I think we largely agree on as kind of people, like policy people, maybe in general, and AI policy people as a subset of that. And, I think technology should unquestionably be safe, right? Should unquestionably be trustworthy, right? I think, having a human adjudicator in all circumstances, I don't know, but you should at least have some recourse, probably. I think these are all kind of broad principles that we either agree with or have like a substantially similar opinion. But my view is, without the environment, okay, so the NIST has been working on an AI risk management framework for some time and holding hearings on it, or having kind of like public sessions about it. And they had the 11th panel, they had a conversation about testing and validation, and the overwhelming statement was context. All the thing that matters most is contextually where and how technology is applied, right? And so, kind of any broad mechanism without that contextual dive in on things that are non-obvious, right? I think that it's like any transparent, discrimination, the kind of housing, discrimination cases that have come forward. I think that, again, there's existing law, there's straightforward stuff that just should be dealt with, right? But as you get deeper into like technology and context specific things, we need an environment to test them and to have people participate in that testing, right? Big takeaway for me so far is not just is it like, oh, I can't, I'm not negatively impacted by this, right? It's very unlikely that AI is going to be like, white men, you guys should go to jail more, get denied loans, or any of that stuff, but at the same time, it's not just that my life experience is different in terms of the risk, but it's also that I literally did not, I didn't consider like 20% or 30% or 40% of the things people were concerned about and the specific reasons they were concerned about them, right? And so that goes to the contextual point. And the second point, along the lines of kind of safety, that I think the conversation should really, at least in part, somewhere focus in earnest, is like on the same panel, they discuss kind of these frontier technologies, the large language models, which are like GPT-3 and a couple other similar products that are put out by different companies. But the main public-facing one is OpenAI's GPT-3, right? But this idea that like any of the one last time. There we go. Any of the large language models, they're like, I would never agree to test or validate one of those models, right? There's just too much. It's too crazy. We just can't know what's going on. And I feel like then the rest of the panel's like, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. I mean, one guy's like, well, I guess we could, but it would just be obsolete by the time we finish validating it. And then we kind of like, yeah, it sucks, move on. I'm like, wait. So we're all just going to say we don't know how to check this like insanely powerful technology outside of just running certain tests, right? And we're fine. I mean, not fine with it, but we're just like, well, yes, that's what we got to do. And the stuff is super useful and it's getting commercialized incredibly quickly, right? And so super valuable. That value is not being spread as broadly as it could, even though it's an inherently like flexible, no code and creative technology. Right. So we're already like, that's also not really being explored until very recently, which I can get into if people care or later. And then the final thing, at least for me, is that this is the very beginning. Like, it feels like we're at the crazy part, but we are before the crazy part still. And it's happening really, 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 really quickly. Right. If you want to keep in touch with, I'm going to put this in the chat. This is one of our board members. But he has the best like AI newsletter with kind of that URL sucked. And I also did it wrong, I think. Oh, give me a sec. Yeah, okay. Anyways, that's the right URL. You just have to copy it. I feel like I'm an idiot. Yeah. All right, let me try this again. All right, here you go, guys. Anyways, this is the best thing to keep up with. Because it'll give you a sense for that. And he has some great presentations, one of which is on our YouTube channel. That's like, why is AI so crazy right now? And again, I want to return back to the point that like, it's crazy. Like, it's crazy. please understand it's crazy and that what you're doing to focus on this is super important, and please take it as seriously as you can and call me if I can ever help. But we're running out of time. We're going to quickly hit this last video because you guys are going to love it. And then we're going to close out the session. All right, here we go. Ready? And go. We have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to rebalance the scales of technological power. And if we get this right, you'll be building the AI applications that define our lives rather than being subjected to them.
You are at the age where you can experiment the most, and anything which looks daunting is very rewarding.
My hope is that together, you'll identify opportunities to invest in the innovative potential of people and organizations within your communities, especially those that have been historically marginalized or overlooked.
We are building up our foundation at home and competing with our strengths, the diversity of background and experience represented across all 50 states. By providing the resources for each community to become competitive, the creative potential that we can unleash is unimaginable.
That was my interest because of the diversity of my district. Being a person of color myself, I just want to make sure that my district is prepared for AI and not afraid of it.
Anytime you try to do something and make it take root, you've got to involve the people you are trying to affect in the deepest level possible.
All right. Thank you for attending my screening. I appreciate it. I dropped my email down there. Feel free to reach out if you have any thoughts, questions, or just interest in what we're working on, or advice, or critiques. Welcome all of it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Austin. We really appreciate it. And thank you to everyone for joining us. Our last session of the day starts at 3 p.m. and it's definitely one I've been looking forward to. So we have Cicely Simpson here to discuss professional development in the public affairs with the pull up your chair methodology from her book. And so if you're interested in joining us for that, you can navigate back to the main Julio page for Wonk Week and select Cicely's session on the agenda. But once again, Austin, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciated it and appreciate the conversation. And yeah, I hope everyone has a lovely rest of Wonk Week. Cool.
Thank you so much. Hopefully y'all enjoyed it. All right. Bye-bye.